All right, welcome everybody to track 5 of the Giants Jukebox. The playlist this year is on shuffle mode, so while this is the third track we're playing this school year, it is actually also the only one that actually aligns with its place in the course sequence. It's the third in our K8 sequence. Sort of works because tonight is, we're going to tackle fifth grade, and next month, we're going to tackle sixth grade before concluding with third and fourth in February and March, respectively. We are glad you're here. And if you're viewing this live, so that would be you, Tara, we're going to send you sketch information at the end of the whole sequence in March. So don't freak out if things don't appear in MoEX tomorrow. When we've played all the tracks this year, I'll send an email out to everyone reminding them to be on the lookout for the email from the state of Michigan. If you're getting this video after we've recorded, we're glad you're viewing the recap and sorry you can't get the state clock hours. But the goal of these sessions are to give you a big bird's eye view of an entire Giants grade level. And while we're a little into the weeds on some of the activities, overall, we're going to try our best to give you a good look at the entire grade overall, while picking out some of the key activities that really help showcase what makes each grade level tick. Tonight, you're listening to me and Dr. Gershmel, who took over writing of these units around Unit 3 during the first go-around, and then we made some updates to all of the units when we ran those live during the 23-24 school year. So you are in very capable hands, and like I said, we're glad that you are here. A couple of quick norms for you. For those of you who are attending live, just wanted to point out that we are some of the most patient and forgiving online teachers you will ever have. Take care of your needs as you have them. If you've got to pause for a second and run out and refill a drink or check on a child or stir the dinner that's on the stove, we're totally okay with that. Just come on back and we will see you when you get here. So that's the biggest norm. Take care of your own needs. We're adult learners doing this after school hours, so it is it is anything goes. So the agenda for the evening tonight, we are going to go over the entire story of fifth grade. With 2 hours to cover these 4 topics, you might think we'd spend about half an hour on each portion, but the story of fifth grade might take just a little bit more than half an hour. Into the weeds might take more than a lot of half an hour. The assessment portion isn't a huge conversation. It's more about how to access it and all that. And it will leave some time for Q&A at the end with Phil and I on general specific content from fifth grade Giants. I also want you to know that while you will continue to access the Giants units from misocialstudies.org, I am super excited to announce that Giants is now officially an MCSS product, the Michigan Council for the Social Studies. So going forward, MCSS will be supporting the curriculum. And as a former president, current secretary, incoming treasurer, I couldn't be more excited to bring us home to the place that makes the most sense. Going forward, too, we're partnering with a couple of funding sources to potentially do some research on how well Giants prepare students for future success. So if you're interested in possibly participating in this, let me know. We're not off the ground running with that yet, but the funding is going to be coming in, and we're excited to undertake that research. And actually, on that same note, Phil is going to hear this for the first time today, but I was having a conversation with Scott Koenig at the Michigan Department of Education today. And while the M-STEP, I could give you a whole 2 hours on why I don't like that test, Scott has been digging in at the state level to what districts that are doing the best on that have been doing. And he said that some of his preliminary research at the State Department of Education shows that they're using programs like Giants and MC3 and these sort of homegrown things that we have built as a state. So yeah, that's good news, and it tells me that hey, some of that will definitely help you if raising your M-STEP scores is one of your agendas. So that is the agenda for the evening. I also wanted to let you guys know, if I can move this forward, there we go. Giants started in about 2016. It was in response to the Michigan Open Book Project. Michigan Open Book Project was a grant that was run through the state over the course of about 3 years, and we developed a K-12 set of textbooks that align to Michigan's content expectations. And one of the big things that we heard after we started releasing those books was, hey, this is great. Where's the resource kit? Where are the lessons? Where are the things that go along with it? We were given about $1 million to spend over 3 years to develop these things. And we had to spend all of that money on developing the books. So there wasn't any plans or funding available to build units. But Ottawa Area Intermediate School District and Rebecca Bush, who was at the time the social studies consultant there, stepped in and started developing some units. And we ended up with third through eighth grade with full units. We've got some beta units for K2 that go along nicely with some of the Michigan Open Book, particularly geography chapters. And while we don't have any plans to move into the high school at this point in time, we're really proud of what we put together and how all of these things work. Now, the purpose of this curriculum, for any of you who have stumbled across it, it's a launch pad. It can be everything you need it to be. If you're brand new, you can teach it from cover to cover. But if you're a seasoned teacher who has been teaching, in this case, fifth grade US history for a really long time, take what makes the most sense and leave the rest of that behind. If you've never been to Giants before, there are a variety of ways to access the units in the past, and while some of them are still alive and active, you want to make sure that any place you're accessing the materials from has that little laptop logo in the upper left-hand corner, unless you've bookmarked individual lessons and units. And if you have, that's okay. We make all of our changes inline in those. But our main Giants website is an offshoot of the Michigan Social Studies Hub. And while I don't think we'll have the relinking issues that plagued us when we moved from Ottawa over to the state website, it's always a possibility when you rely on Google and the changes they often make without talking to people. I'll point anyone who has used a Google form since March of last year as a great reminder of how easy it used to be to share a link, and now all those extra steps you have to do now. I recently got an email from a teacher wondering why we were changing permissions on the lessons. We didn't. Google changed something in the functionality, and I had to go in and change some settings on about 60 different Google documents to make that work. So just keep in mind these buttons on the side here are hoverable, so you can't click on those, but you can click on the buttons that pop up when your mouse hovers over each one. And also bookmark each individual page. It's way easier. It's the Google Docs that we recommend loading fresh each time because we do make updates and sometimes Google is wonky. And so the best place to go is here. But those changes usually only happen about once every 5 or 6 years. So in terms of Google. So I'll leave it there. Phil has other notes on that, but we'll move into fifth grade because Phil has gone through many different software companies updating things that they said they would never update. So yeah, we'll leave that there. I've been thinking a lot as we've been building the Jukebox series about what a good compelling question for the entire course is. And I'll talk about a compelling question in just a sec, but I tried to think what really summarizes everything that we're trying to put down here in fifth grade. And it felt like this, and I'm going to be honest with you, US history is my background. I loved developing these units. I grappled with this one specifically for a really long time. In the end, I liked this best of what we came up with, primarily because it encompasses everybody who was here at the time. It lets students trace indigenous communities, colonization, conflict, revolution, constitution building, all as a series of choices about values, identity, and power. So I really like this one, even though it's kind of clunky. When you're teaching with Giants, we recommend you use these compelling questions, and we use them in place of, and oftentimes, the I can statements that may have once dotted your board. The compelling question should be up over the course of an entire unit. It's the big question that guides every lesson within the unit. But what you might swap out, and we'll talk a little bit about that as I go through the next 15 slides rapid fire here. What you might also do is swap out the supporting questions because a compelling question is a big, broad, arguable overview question that multiple perspectives can be brought to. So I might have a completely different answer to Phil based off of our study of the same evidence, and that is totally fine. As long as it is backed up with a solid claim and argument and reasoning and evidence. So a compelling question is great, and since this is an elementary rollout, it's a great connection to your ELA block because you're doing some of these writing pieces anyway. So use the compelling question there and use it as part of your ELA block, especially if you are crunched for time on some of those writing lessons and writing units. So The difference between the two is that there are supporting questions, and those do have a right or wrong answer. And supporting questions are what guide all of our lessons. So the compelling question guides the unit, the supporting questions guide the individual lessons, and students will have an answer to all of those by the end of each lesson. And those are, again, little jigsaw pieces that when you put them all together, paint your students' picture of what their answer to the compelling question might be. So this is our pacing view. The purpose of the pacing view is to show you roughly how long each unit is expected to take. You can see when you get into the weeds of individual units that most units have about 3 lessons, and 3 lessons in traditional terms might lead you to believe there are only 3 days worth of instruction here. That is not the case. A great example of what to do is take the number of weeks and divide by the number of lessons, and you'll get a rough estimate about how long each one should take. So if unit 1 is a 2-week unit, that's 1 lesson, so that's 2 weeks roughly. Unit 3 has 3 lessons. It's slated for 6 weeks on the pacing view, so that means each lesson should take about 2 weeks. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but if you motor through all the activities in a 2-week lesson in a day, you definitely haven't gone deep enough. And also remember, if you are brand new to this curriculum and you are brand new to, if you're brand new to this curriculum and you're brand new to even teaching fifth grade or fifth grade US history, keep in mind it takes 3 to 5 years to get good with any curriculum. So it's quite possible you won't make it through everything in the course of the year. And that's normal. I do new teacher mentoring at my ISD as well. And that's one of the things that I like to reassure them early on. You're not going to get through everything the first time you go through it, and that's okay. We're already at 2 snow days in the north, and we haven't had Christmas break yet. I'm feeling like this is going to be a snow day heavy school year, which means even my veteran teachers probably won't get through everything. But just remember, if you are starting a new curriculum in any content area, it takes 3 to 5 years to get good enough and comfortable enough with it to really truly make it through all of it. So I mentioned before, each unit is centered around a compelling question. And what I'm going to do now is go rapid fire through all of the different units and their compelling and supporting questions to kind of tell the story of fifth grade. And then I'm going to end with some of the common components of all the lessons and all the units and all the grade levels. And then the final portion before I turn things over to Phil is we have a really cool but sometimes complex game that goes along with fifth grade. So I'm going to spend about 5 or 6 minutes kind of outlining the major points on that. So that's where we're going over the next few minutes here. Our first unit is very basic. It fits really nicely at the start of the school year when you're going over rules and routines and procedures. It's about 2 weeks, and this unit gives students all the foundations that they're going to need to study social studies this year. It introduces for you, if you're brand new to this, and for your students, the idea of a compelling question and what that is, and a supporting question and what the purpose of those are to you and students. And it's here that we introduce what the course is going to be about for students, gives them some of the background knowledge that will prepare them for inquiry-based instruction. And because it's a 1 lesson unit, we don't have any supporting questions for it. So this is the question that'll be up on your board for about 2 weeks. How do we study social studies? And then by the time your students are done with it, they'll have a pretty solid foundation to move on into their actual study of social studies. So the second unit will take about 4 weeks for students to get through. And it, for the most part, introduces a large swath of the 3 worlds that meet. But I want to be very clear, there's a big exception here. We don't talk as much about Africa in Unit 2 as we do in Unit 3. This is intentional, and it's twofold in terms of reasoning. First, we really, really wanted to do the topic of enslavement justice. We did not want to cut corners. We didn't want to be one of those programs that got held up as, look, they completely wrote this out of history. We really wanted to do that justice. We also wanted to do the same thing for Indigenous peoples. And so as we started developing these units, we realized we have to tell here in this unit the Indigenous story and the European story. And then this ended up ballooning up to like a 10-week unit. And we're like, we can't do that. We gotta figure out how to make this work. So we're going to introduce the concept here, but we are going into far more detail in later units. So on that note, You see with our supporting questions, so our compelling question is how do cultures change as a result of contact? And then our three lessons in this unit are centered around these questions. What push factors led Europeans to explore new areas? How did North American indigenous peoples adapt to and modify their environment? And then what were the positive and negative impacts of European encounters and in changes? So on that note, you see we're talking about European exploration here in the first lesson. And again, you get some hints of enslavement in Africa here, but there's more to come in Unit 3. We then spend an entire lesson devoted solely to our indigenous populations and what conditions and connections existed in those various regions of the United States and how the indigenous people lived in these regions. We finish the whole thing by again talking about the positive and negative impacts of European encounters and exchanges. We don't sugarcoat. There aren't a lot of great positive impacts of European encounters in terms of if you're an indigenous person. But we do try to make sure that we are, there are some areas here to, I don't want to say both sides it, but there are some areas of opportunity here to talk about how things changed both in a negative and a positive way. So we do talk a little bit about that. We don't like to pull the rug out from completely underneath a fifth grader. We save that for eighth grade. Eighth grade has some very, very tough history. So you can always take parts of the Africa unit later on and wedge them between lessons 2 and 3 here if you really want to. That's the beauty of inquiry-based instruction. You can do whatever you want to and need to do. You've got all the tools at your disposal. But again, that's part of the rationale for why we save this for the next lesson, the next unit. So on that note, Unit 3, to what extent does geography determine destiny? I really love this question. And this is actually a question that pops up in sixth grade. It pops up in seventh grade. It could probably pop up in a couple of places in high school if we had some high school units. It's a really good question. So here we talk a little bit more about those conditions and connections, and that's our first question, our first supporting question, the first lesson. What conditions and connections determine the fate of a settlement? Phil has some great activities in here that he's going to showcase in a little bit. And they're actually some of my favorite in his entire repertoire. And I have a cloned copy of his hard drive. His repertoire is huge. And this is the activities that are in this unit are some of my favorites. We also here get into triangular trade and the African empires that existed at the time. We use this as a launch pad into why and how different colonial regions took off in the directions that they took off. This is a really important concept for the understanding of the eighth grade US history course as we talk about the issue of slavery and how it drove that entire narrative. And the foundations of that all take place here in your class. It's why it's such an important class, and the role that you play is so very important in teaching this history because the eighth grade teachers can't teach it without you. We then move into Unit 4. Did the early colonies create America? And our supporting questions this time around, what did some of the early colonies try in terms of self-government? This is a really important concept when we finish the course because a lot of those early ideas in terms of what those early colonies tried for self-government actually ended up in the Constitution and ended up as the laws of the land that are still in place today. So again, really important unit. The first lesson really gets into some of those ideas. And we're hopeful that at the end of the year, students will make a connection back to the things from this unit specifically when we get into that creating a Constitution unit. We then have what was life like for people living in the early colonies. Our grade level content expectations for fifth grade social studies are pretty cut and dry. And they want a whole case study on what life was like for people in New England and what life was like for people in the middle colonies and what life was like for people in the southern colonies, with the caveat that Phil and I both don't like the term middle colonies and the way that we group some of these things. It's a longer conversation for a different day, but Phil and I are in lockstep on that because, like I said, longer conversation for a different day. But we finish up with what successes and failures did the early colonists face. This is kind of important because for every successful colony, there were, some not as successful colonies. I'm looking at you, Roanoke. So, what successes and failures did those early colonists face? Our fifth unit starts to lead us into the American Revolution. How does conflict create change? So we can't talk about the American Revolution without talking about the French and Indian War, because without the French and Indian War, it might have been a little bit longer before we went that revolution route. But we have our whole lesson on the causes and consequences of the French and Indian War, and it's here that we sort of set the stage for what happens in the next unit when we get into the revolution. So we go through the French and Indian War here. We talk about what happened during it, and then we move right into, with the second lesson, how did increasing British control change colonial actions and attitudes towards Great Britain? This is where we really, really hear the colonist side of the story on why they felt like independence was necessary. This is where we get into some of my favorite activities from fifth grade are in here. You, as the teacher, get to come in one day and, with no context whatsoever, announce to students that every paper you hand out to them for classwork for the rest of the school year, they've got to pay for. Darn it, because that's the stamp tax, or the yes, it's words are hard after 4 o'clock, but that's these are the things that the colonists grappled with, and we're going to make students sweat it out for a little while. An eighth grader would never believe that, but fifth graders, oh man, do they get feisty. You can even say things like, "And if you use a tissue, you've got to pay me a quarter." All these things get them really fired up, like, "That's not fair, that's not fair." And then you get to use that emotional piece to lead into, well, gosh, guess what? The colonists went through something very similar. And then the final lesson in this lead up to the revolution is, given the conflict and change within the colonies, how did colonists decide whether or not to remain loyal to Great Britain? The way we sometimes tell the United States story and the American Revolution, we make it believe that every single person that was living here was in favor of independence. And that was just not the case. You had the patriots, you had the loyalists, and you had some people that were the Switzerland of the time. So we kind of introduce these concepts because they come into play again in the revolutionary unit, which is the next one. Is revolution ever justified? This is a great question. This is a question that your high school world history teacher is also going to take a strong look at as they get into era 6 of world history, and they get into things like the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution. We had a whole standard on revolutions throughout the world, and it's ours here in the United States that kicks a lot of those off. So our supporting questions here: is revolution ever justified? This is a 4 lesson unit, and if you remember the pacing view, this is a longer unit. This is the longest unit in fifth grade because the American Revolution is that important. Why did the colonists feel they have the right to declare independence? This is where everything that they learned in that previous unit comes right back. What were the realities of the war for both sides? What contributions did other groups make to the war? So we're not just looking at the major players. We're looking at indigenous peoples. We're looking at, again, enslaved peoples, freed slaves, all of those. And then what were the consequences of the war for both sides? We like to think of it as this cut and dry. Hey, we like to think of it as this cut and dry. Hey, the consequence was America got its independence and Britain lost its colonies. But it's much wider, it's much bigger than that. So this lesson lets kids really sink their teeth into that. And then finally, how do we balance power? This is the final unit. And the 3 questions here are: what were the Articles of Confederation and why did they fail? What issues did those in attendance at the Constitutional Convention face? And then what compromises were reached at the Constitutional Convention? This is how you end your school year. And by the time that you have made it through all of these units, your students understand that early part of the American story, and they're really primed and ready for the next US history course. Unfortunately, the next US history course doesn't come for 3 more years. We spend some time traipsing around the world studying geography, which Phil's wife Carol is going to outline at our 6th grade rollout next month. And then we also spend a little bit of time digging into the ancient world history, which Phil and I outlined last month. So we traipse around the world for a little bit before we get back to the US story. But if you've made it through all these units, your students are going to have a really solid foundation that prepares them well for 8th grade. So some common characteristics of the Giants units before I get into colonies and then turn things over solely to Phil for a little while. Most units will have compelling and supporting question posters that you can print off. They're sort of designed for legal sized paper if your school has those, but they'll print on whatever size paper you have. Best of all is tabloid if you have them, because those are much, much bigger. But these compelling and supporting question posters, like I said, can replace the I can statements on your board. Because if you're going all in with inquiry, a kind of lower level I can statement isn't going to cut it. We really want kids always focused in on these questions and what their answers might be. So that's a common component of these. Oftentimes, we use Michigan Open Book Project as our text, so to speak, because again, Open Book is not a curriculum. The textbook and this curriculum are designed to work together. But the good news is, if you have a different US history textbook in your classroom, history is history in terms of like what's overall covered. So you can use that instead. But if you do use Open Book, we've got some reading guides buried through some of these, which some teachers have found really handy. They're not in every lesson and every unit, but especially as we move forward, teachers have found a lot of those to be really useful with their kids to kind of guide their reading as they go through. And then we have the Colonies game, which is unique to fifth grade. It doesn't exist in any of the other grade levels. And the Colonies game, after 2 rounds of revisions across 5 years of development and refinement, I still get a ton of questions about. It was not my goal to overcomplicate things. It was not my goal to confuse everyone. But I'm going to approach this time around with two very important considerations in mind. First of all, if this is your first year teaching with Giants and you look at this and you go, I don't know what to do, skip it. Skip it entirely your first year using the curriculum. Um, in place of the colonies pieces and the lesson plans proper, um, simply give students the scenarios. So there's a scenario for every unit starting with unit 3. And at the start of every unit, give kids that scenario and have them grapple with how they would solve the problem. Then file that away. And at the end of the unit, when they know how the colonists solve the same problem, because each unit's problem that the colonists have to face is very much what's the word I'm looking for, linked back to that the scenario that we give in colonies. So those two things link very nicely. So at the end of it, they get to look at their solution and compare it to the colonist solution. Um, that's all you really need to do with it the first year is you get comfortable with everything else, and then you can go back in. When you do decide to bring this in, though, Phil and I have been working on some really cool digital projects that don't link specifically to any one grade level, but can be pulled into multiple ones. We do this almost every summer. Hoping we're doing it again this summer, hoping we're doing it for the next 10 summers because I absolutely love my time working with him on these. But because I've learned how to do so much programming because of him, I'm actually going to work on trying to simplify colonies a little bit more by building some digital tools that will make some of the most confusing parts a little simpler for the teacher at the end. But again, the key thing to keep in mind is everyone who has asked me questions about this has been overthinking the purpose and instructions of the games. Do your best not to overthink it. It's supposed to be a powerful simulation activity, and it's absolutely impossible for Phil and I, as unit developers, to build a set of, shall I say, if then statements for every component of this that you come across. It relies heavily on your judgment as the teacher, and in some cases, the random luck of the draw with the cards that you'll print off and use with kids, with groups in each unit. It also depends on how well the solutions that the kids in their groups come up with, and how that solution maybe mirrors or even in some cases might exceed what the colonists did when they were faced with the same thing. You could also, and I wouldn't have said this 2 years ago. I wouldn't have said this not 2 years ago. I wouldn't have said this the last time Phil and I did these units because it wasn't a thing. But you might also decide to use AI to help you in judging student solutions if the need arises. But at the end of the day, this is meant to be a fun addition to the curriculum, so don't overthink it. Do customize it to whatever fit you want it to, whatever fill you want it to fit. I have some teachers that skip it entirely. I have some teachers that give it 10 minutes at the start and the end of a unit. I have some teachers that teach in the weeds with it and go in depth. And it's a significant portion of their class period. Whatever camp you fall into, it's a game. Kids take the chances. Your job as teachers is to just weigh the choices they make in terms of viability and how realistic their solutions are. Obviously, if their solution to marauding British people trying or British soldiers trying to take over their city is to launch a nuclear weapon at them, we didn't have those back then, so that's not a viable solution. So that's what I mean by use your best judgment as teachers. But again, skip it if it's too complex. Totally get it. And remember, we wanted flexibility in how you might choose to approach it. And because of that, we give you more of a framework than a step by step guide. That's where a lot of the confusion tends to come in. We've made the rules to this broad intentionally because some teachers, like I said, are going to dive in and make it a huge part of their course, and just as many will be using it the way it's presented in the units. And we just want to make sure the whichever camp you fall into, you've got a good springboard. And if all you're using it for is a springboard and you move on, that's cool too. So, in terms of how it's structured in Unit 2, students it's sort of introduced and students develop a colonist. This can be a great creative writing prompt for them. Who is your person that's coming to America? What's their name? What are their goals? What skills do they have? What limitations might they have? And students will work collaboratively in the same group. So once they've created their character, they sort of get shuffled, and all these kids become a group of like 4 or 5 throughout the course of the year. So you might say, hey, break into your colonies group, everybody, and they'll move together, and you'll introduce the problem for the unit and they'll talk about their solution and we'll move forward. In Unit 3, there's a little bit of a students land. They get their first scenario. They built their supply rosters. There's some instructions for those in the colony's handbook. They were possibly able to increase what their colonies set up with depending on where they landed, which is oftentimes luck of the draw. Phil did a lot of great work with this gridded map that we also have some copies of that Tara, I might send out to Jefferson for you because you guys have been great to work with over the last year and a half that you guys have been sort of looking at and adopting giants. But so there's some maps that are available that you can put up in your classroom, and they can design a flag, and they can put their flags in the proper grids on the map and go back to it. But Unit 3 is landing in their first scenario. In Unit 4, they grapple with their next scenario. The big question for them in Unit 4 is, if your colony is going to grow, how are you going to attract people to live there? And that again goes along with the supporting question for that unit. What are the conditions and connections in the area? What conditions are in the squares around your home square? What direction are the conditions most favorable for expansion if your population grows? So that's kind of the connective tissue between those two. In Unit 5, you actually get 2 scenarios. You get one after the French and Indian War, and you get one before the French and Indian War. So students will go through those, and as we go through here, I did this as a separate video before, so I'm gonna skip ahead to just the final piece of these. As you sort of progress through each one, there's going to be places where it says first draw, second draw, third draw, depending on the unit. These are cards that keep getting added to the stack as you go through, and it's like, hey, you get your solution did well, you get 10 extra people, you get a little bit more food, you get a little bit more of this, your farmland is increasing. Again, don't overthink it. And at the end of every unit, a colonial explorer designee from each group is going to present their final solutions to the class and to you. And you, as the teacher, are the judge who's going to weigh each student's solution in terms of historical context, how feasible it is, etc. And if you then, as the teacher, are going to decide based off of their solution to the problem that they're expected to solve. Does your colony grow? Does it remain stagnant, or do they lose pieces of it? So, again, this is, I think, the part that throws people the most is the fact that we don't have a clear set of if this, then they grow, and if not, then they don't. It's up to you as the teacher to decide, like, hey, this is a really good solution. I think that would have worked really well for the colonists, even though it's not the way the colonists went. So go ahead and add your flag to 2 more squares around your colony. The end of this, you get to say, hey, look at this colony over here with all this territory. Look at what a great job they did. So there's a little bit of celebration there, but it's a game. Have fun with it. Don't try to overthink it. You're just adding to the supply sheets each time. Kids are going to keep those in a folder. They'll bring it up to you. You'll add to it for them. You'll cross out the previous one, or you'll print off a new sheet and write what was there before and what the new totals are. And these totals are a great way to gauge how well their colony is doing. The higher the numbers in all of these, the better you're probably doing. And if you've got high numbers of people and very little food coming in, they're probably not doing so well. You need one pair of six-sided die for this too. It's almost a little bit like a role-playing game on that front. Again, we've tried to include all of these things in the instructions. I've tried to revise the instructions. I've gone through and revised them a little bit more again this year. And I'm going to try to simplify some of those pieces that I get the most questions on by building a little online portal you can go to and really quickly enter your information, and poof, it'll spit back your cards. So to be continued on that front. It won't be ready this school year, but I'm hopeful it'll be ready for the next school year. And again, it's only possible because Phil has taxed my brain 6 ways to Sunday over the last decade in building some of his older stuff from the 80s and 90s and bringing it up to the current realm today, so that it's renderable on modern computers. And because of all that, I learned all this really cool programming that might make this piece of it a little bit easier too. So that's it for colonies. And with that, Phil, I tried to keep it at half an hour, but I went just a little bit over. And with that, I get to turn things over to the real star of the evening, my friend and mentor, Dr. Phil Gershmel, for some examples of the spatial thinking activities, and most importantly, why these are important to do for kids. So, Phil, take it away.
Okay. This is about spatial thinking activities, but you could just use the word map activities. The whole point is to put a visual image in front of them. There is a handout that Dave will put up on the Giants website that basically outlines these. So there's no need to take detailed notes of this. Just relax and see what they can use from these map activities. The activities are not designed to be lessons. They're designed to support lessons that you're already doing, not to replace them. And most of the activities can be done in 5 to 10 minutes. Like I say, they're a supporting activity. There's two rationales for doing it this way, and both of them come from recent research in neuroscience. The first thing is that memories are more durable if they're formed with both a temporal and a spatial context. This is one of the problems with having just a text talking about when things happened and in what order and so on, and why people invented things like timelines. And the second rationale is a map activity clearly is shown to engage more brain networks and more connections between them than reading and discussing and writing about text. Having said that, you're going to see that a lot of our map activities actually are prompts for writing activities of some kind, and they do mention some of the ELA standards that they meet. So, to start it out with the one that I would start out right at the beginning, and some teachers choose to do this the very first week, is a little game about where should we locate our colony when we come to the new world here. This is a presentation, and Dave has made a set of interactive versions. They view this presentation, and they try to pick a location to build their colony. The map that you see in the background, however, is actually about 2/3 of the way through the presentation, because the whole point of it is that as they get more information, they might change their mind about what would be the best place to put this colony. What they gain out of this is some key facts about North America in a very engaging way. And what you gain out of it as a teacher is that you can diagnose some of their prior knowledge and some of their map reading skills. So this might take about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to run this. And some teachers have chosen to do this as, 5 minutes at the beginning of the class, and then you add a few more frames. it turns out to be a real place. And we've got one of these games for every grade level. The real place turns out to be a historically important place in that grade level standards. Yep. Another activity that happens real early, and this one takes all of about 3 minutes, the students use this map to compare the water temperature at the same latitude. If you've ever done any swimming or surfing in the ocean, you could talk about it from that first-hand point of view. I have done some swimming on both coasts, and I can attest to the fact that it's about 15 to 20 degrees warmer in the ocean on the Atlantic side. And when you see that the Atlantic is much warmer, that basically is a setup for an inquiry about winds and ocean currents. Or you could go straight to the activity on winds and ocean currents. In this one, what they do is they watch a presentation and they put arrows on a map to show the direction of these ocean currents. And we give them a copy of this exact map. So they're basically transferring this information here. The objective is to see that if you try to understand the workings of an environmental system, it turns out to be much easier than memorizing some of the effects. And this pattern of ocean currents, well, let me just go into a little bit more detail, kind of to show you how Giants presentations work. It talks a little bit about Columbus going down to the Canary Islands and measuring the wind there before he made his trip, and finding out that they blow from the east about 95% of the time. This was actually great news if you want to go west in a sailing ship. It's terrible news if you think the earth is flat and there's an edge out on the west and you're going to get pushed over it. As the water is pushed across the ocean, it gets warmer because it's real close to the equator. The sun's nearly overhead. That warmer water is what makes hurricanes get stronger in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. That water, in turn, piles up so that this side of North America, the ocean is actually a couple feet higher, and it has to escape somewhere. And the only way it can escape is to kind of go north along the coast, which brings warm water all the way up to New England. When it finally reaches about the latitude of New England, the latitude of the Great Lakes, it runs into a part of the world where the winds blow more often from the west. I mean, that's the direction we look to see where the storms are coming. And as that wind pushes the water west across the ocean, pushes it over toward Europe, it makes Europe a whole lot warmer than it otherwise would be. But that water is getting cooler and cooler as it goes, partly because it gets icebergs in it, from around Greenland and so on. And then finally, some of that water flows south along the coast of Africa to replace the water. And what you wind up with is this big circular flow that could carry ships to the Americas and back to Europe very efficiently. The problem is, it was like a gold delivery system for the British, because the Spanish ships would go over, they would stop in South America, they would load up with gold, maybe they'd catch a couple tropical disease, they'd have a fight, a couple of them would get injured, and then on their way back, they wind up having to sail close to Britain, and all Britain has to do is kind of go out and capture them out of the spot. This is basically why Spain sent the Armada north to defeat the British, and the winds turn out to be the main reason why the Armada failed. So I'm going to stop here. The presentation keeps on going. It's got information about Ben Franklin, the Gulf Stream, African deserts, icebergs, the Titanic, all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, it's long, but I'm going to take advantage of this moment to tell you a little bit about Giant's presentations. That the presentations on the website are almost all too long. And there's a good reason for that. We've looked at your keyboard and we know your keyboard has a delete key on it. It does not have a create key. And a lot of these presentations have been used by a dozen teachers, 2 dozen teachers. They call me up or they send me an email. They say, this presentation would work better if you'd have a little bit of an additional explanation here. Maybe put a definition card up. And I say, okay, I agree. And I add that frame. If you don't need that frame, just delete it. But if a teacher told me it was useful, generally I would add that frame to it. And most of the presentations would increase by about 10 or 15 frames from when the first time that they were presented. And this particular winds and ocean currents presentation, Dave will tell you it's been around since about 2007. And it has had a lot of commentary over that time. Regions of North America is an activity that you can use just about anywhere in the first half of the course. Basically, it's a step-by-step presentation that guides students in drawing a handful of lines to divide North America into environmental regions. What they gain out of it is a durable mental map that can help them organize a lot of other information about slavery, about soils, about the need for barbed wire when you go out on the Great Plains, things like that. And what you see flashed up in the corner there is a sixth grader's answer on a pop quiz that came 3 weeks after the presentation. So when I tell you that this thing helps them build a durable mental map, I've got proof from teachers who have used it and proud of how well their students remember it when they didn't know the quiz was coming. And then they use it for activity in houses and environments. They match drawings of several typical houses for the indigenous people with the environments where they fit. In effect, they're applying their knowledge of North America regions to illustrate a basic principle. Where you live affects how you live. That was one of Dave's compelling questions for about, I think, unit 2 or 3. I don't remember which one. The activity on colonies and what we call colonial logic. Each of 3 groups, you divide your class into 3 groups, and each group gets one map that shows the locations of the missions or trading posts or forts that were built by one country. Their task is to color their region and try to figure out which country's colony their particular map shows. When they put the maps together, they can predict where conflicts are likely to occur between the French, Spanish, and British people who had different reasons for locating the colonies where they did. They were using different products. They were sending different kinds of people over to be colonists. In other words, they had a different colonial logic. This one is so important that we actually made an online interactive map, a clickable map, that you could use to do the activity as a whole class discussion if you want to. Or you could hand out the maps and have them work a little bit, and then we could go to the clickable map. But it lets you turn on place lists and numbers and arrows of where the territories were and so on. Soil productivity is a very different kind of activity. Basically, it's an illustrated presentation to be a 10-minute crash course about why soils in some regions are likely to give farmers more than twice the yield with a whole lot less effort. And it fills a gap in the prior knowledge for a lot of teachers. I mean, Americans in general tend to know a fair amount about weather and a little bit less about world climate patterns and a little bit less about world geology. But generally, they have not learned very much at all about soils. And one of the problems is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about soils. So this presentation will help you show that there really is a very strong link between the soil in a place, the crop yield, the need for slavery, the Civil War, depression, and connecting it up to today, it's going to talk about why the Soviet Union collapsed, what's going on with the Ukrainian invasion and why they're going in the particular places they are. And it actually says something about trade and tariffs and what countries have got good soils to produce certain kinds of crops and so on. For the students, you might not even use the presentation because there is a handout that explains two very different kinds of problem soils that affected the growth of colonial America. Uh, and the clickable map lets you put those problem soils on a map like that. You can then turn on other layers on that map. I clicked on wheat production, indigo, and rice. And if I go back to the previous frame, you'll notice that there seems to be a little band right along the coast in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia that does not have this particular kind of problem soil. And there's also a kind of a gap in between the two problem soils here in the Hudson Valley of New York and in southeastern Pennsylvania and so on. And when you turn the crops on, you see that those were the really good places. This is going to tie into the colonial game because when the students get their square on this map as to where they are, their colony is built, they can take a look at this clickable map and they can get some information about what that colony is like and what are the resources that you have in that particular place. Because it turns out that the southern colonies were able to grow rice and indigo right along the coast, but there really wasn't very much reason to move inland because the soils, when you go more than about 20 miles away from the coast, are really terrible. And until Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin and you had something that you could actually produce on that soil that you could sell to the rest of the world, it was really hard to make a living down there. So wheat by the Hudson and Connecticut River valleys and southeastern Pennsylvania. And if you turn on the layer for hills, you'll see why northeastern Pennsylvania did not have very much wheat production. Indigo and rice growing only in the Tidewater region within about 20 miles of the coast. And inland from that, it was really hard to make a living. That ties in with a very short graphing activity about the race to 1,000,000 people. Because what the students do is they view a presentation or they look at the raw data and they build a graph about the growth of New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Charleston. And as you can see, they all started out with about the same population. And New York and Philadelphia did a little bit better until the Erie Canal came along, and then New York absolutely took off. What the students gain out of this little activity is to see how population growth was strongly influenced by the environmental conditions in different regions. And the fact that Charleston did not have a hinterland where people could move inland and population could grow basically limited its ability to grow very fast until cotton became important after the Revolution. The U.S. Geohistogram is a powerful graphical organizer that you could introduce just about anywhere in the class. I'm putting it here because one of the uses for it is to emphasize that Spanish and British were here at about the same time, and they actually came a little bit after the Dutch people came into the New York Hudson River Valley. But this particular graphic organizer and this presentation will give you about a dozen different mini activities that you could do with it. And I'll give you a chance to take a look at it later on if you want. King Philip's War, I've said this a couple times before, is a very different kind of activity. Basically, it's a primary document written by somebody who was making a chronicle of the war in New England. And we pulled out a handful of quotations from there The student's job is to take these quotations and to put them into a number of different categories. The presentation explains the categories. We're meeting an ELA standard about critical reading. And students realized that attitudes toward indigenous people, even in the colonial era, were very complicated. And they resemble some of today's opinions that you can find out on the internet about race, about culture, about immigration. So it gives you a nice backdoor way to talk about the fact that the colonies were not, back when America was great and everybody thought the same. They didn't. They didn't think the same about a whole lot of things. And Davis mentioned that even at the time of the Revolution, there were a lot of competing opinions. Corn versus cotton is not a competing opinion. It's a geographical fact that if you go through 7 steps, you find out that it took about 20 times as much work per acre to grow a cotton crop as to grow a corn crop. This is part of the justification for slavery, and we've got a little mini activity where students copy numbers from the table that you see down at the bottom onto the different locations on the map. This actually does 3 things for them. First of all, they actually find out where some of these places are on the map in a more engaging way than giving them a list of place names and they have to locate them. They find out that there was a rather dramatic difference in the number of slaves that were brought to different parts of the New World. And there is a climate reason for this. And the presentation explains a little bit more about what that's about. What they get is a more accurate and durable memory of the numbers of people that were forcibly brought to different parts of the New World. Falling dominoes could be a longer activity. It could be a little mini activity that you do for 5 minutes at the beginning of about 5 or 6 different classes. Basically, what they get is a number of short paragraphs, and we provide them in a number of different ways. They can either be a list of paragraphs like this, or you can give different groups a card that has one of the paragraphs on it. And their job is then to talk to each other a little bit, helped by a map and a presentation, and to arrange these in chronological order. It's kind of an engaging way to explain or to summarize a number of different steps in early American history. British naval battles, we've actually got 2 different parts of it. One of them is a simple map activity set during the time of what we call the French and Indian War. They're basically locating major naval battles between European powers involving the British, helped by a map and a presentation. And what you find out is that the French and Indian War was a tiny little part of a global conflict. And most of the battles were fought on other continents and on the oceans. But our colonies got caught up in that war. And it's a review of latitude and longitude. If you need to review that for people, this is a good handy way to do it. The geopolitical board game is another somewhat longer game. What they do is they watch a presentation or they look at the table of dates and they put colored chips on the map. The dates are all coded by the same number letter coding system that your clickable map uses. And I happened to put up 1664. That's when New Amsterdam, a Dutch colony, was captured by the British and renamed New York. And what they are learning is a quick way to kind of review a lot of the other things that happened. And what they see is how the British gradually surrounded and eventually pushed the French out of all the land around the Great Lakes. And both the versions, there are 2 versions of this. One of them's electronic, and one of them is a print version. and which they're actually putting physical ships out there. Uh, they use the clickable map as the base, so students can link this colony placement with some of the other environmental characteristics of the different parts of the colonies. Locating our fort is something that you do on a really miserable day in February. It's basically a replay it's like a redo of the midwinter of the location game. And their time now is to pick a location for a fort at the time of the revolution. So back in September, they were picking a location for a colony on the East Coast. Now they're using the same kind of logic to pick a location for a Revolutionary War fort. And slowly, the presentation gives them more information, and they wind up picking the place for Ticonderoga. What they see out of this is how Fort Stanwix, West Point, and Ticonderoga were all strategically important. They were like corks in the pipe that came south from Canada, north from New York City, or east from the Great Lakes. And when a battle was fought at each one of those locations, basically the Battle of Saratoga was inevitable, that the British were going to lose that battle because they'd already lost three other ones that were kind of important. That brings us back to British naval battles part 2, because one of the reasons that Saratoga happened and Yorktown was that both of them were tied into international battles. This one grew out of a history conference about 8 years ago, when the theme of the conference was using art to help teach history. And I said, there's something about the art of the late 1700s that there were an awful lot of artists that made paintings of naval battles. And we went out on Google and we found a handful of those naval battle paintings. And if you mark those locations on the world map, you find out one more time that the American patriots were not standing alone against the British Empire, that Britain had 63 large battleships, what they called ships of the line. They had 63 of them. The problem is 15 of them were in India and 6 of them were around Gibraltar, and a handful of them were in the North Sea, and a bunch of them were down in the Caribbean. And the result was that the Britain commander wanted 12 ships of the line in the Chesapeake Bay, but he was only allowed to have 5 of them because Britain was fighting too many battles in other places around the world. And the activity, the way it's set up, lets you review a little bit of art history and journalism technology, because these old paintings were actually the newspapers of the day. They were telling people what the news were, where battles were fought, and who won. And it's kind of an interesting way to describe how things were different at that time compared to today. Kings Mountain is another technology piece, but a very different kind of technology. What the students do is there's a short presentation, or they could read this handout, which has 4 little thought questions at the end of it, kind of a reading guide. And you get to compare the costs, the reload times, and the accuracy of muskets and rifles. Because the Kings Mountain battle was, I'm not going to tell you too much about the PowerPoint, you just go look at it yourself. It was a weird battle in the Revolution because there was only one British soldier in the entire battle. He was the leader of the British side, but the British side was almost entirely loyalists from America. They were equipped with muskets, and the Patriot side was equipped with rifles, and the battle was hopelessly one-sided as a result of the difference in technology. One of the consequences of the battle was that Cornwallis lost almost all of the loyalists who had been fighting on his side. And when that happened, he said, the only thing I can do is, get the hell out of Dodge here. And he took off to Yorktown in order to meet the fleet, which never arrived because the French had beat the British in the, well, anyway, that's the story. What they see is why the battle at Kings Mountain could be considered more pivotal than either Saratoga or Yorktown. That in some senses, both Saratoga and Yorktown were inevitable ends. They weren't really major battles. They were what happened after the battles had kind of determined the outcome. And the outcome, in the case of Kings Mountain, was determined largely by who had the better weapons. The last activity on my list here is the culminating activity. Where should we build the Capitol? Basically, what students do is you divide them into 8 different groups, and each one of those groups gets a map with either a table that they have to finish the mathematics of or a graph that they have to finish. In other words, they get a total of 8 different kinds of information in the class. What they realize is that the choice of the location for the Capitol was actually quite easy. It wasn't that, Jefferson and Hamilton got together over supper and got drunk and finally sorted out exactly where they ought to put the Capitol. It was like when they went back to the Constitutional Convention to talk a little bit about where should we put the Capitol, just about everybody agreed on the same place, even if they were thinking about slavery or climate or landforms or products or trade with Europe and so on. In other words, this winds up being a review of the whole year, and it meets several standards in math. So it gives you a good argument to get a few more minutes saying you're going to be meeting some math objectives anyway, so why don't we do a little bit more social studies this week? And we'll do these graphing activities. So that's my suite of activities. Like I say, they are to support what you're doing, not to add to it, not to replace it. About the regions, about the colonies, about the battles, about the products. They are designed to reinforce each other and to build on activities that were done earlier in this year or in earlier grades. And there's a parallel activity in 4th and 3rd grade for a whole lot of these. And the activities are designed to use different engines. As I've been describing them, they do very different things in these activities because the goal is to fit each topic with an approach that is proved to be effective. But a secondary goal is to enhance the interest, especially in, January, February, and March, by adding a little bit of day-to-day variety to the class, that they're not all activities of read this paragraph and answer these questions. They're activities that involve manipulating map information in different ways. So you can pick and choose. You don't have to do them all. You can start, like Dave said, slowly. Try out just a few of them. Add them as you see fit. But remember, they are designed to support each other as part of a structured curriculum. So I theoretically have 10 or 15 minutes left if you wanted to take a closer look at any one of these activities, or do you want to look at the clickable maps? So either send me a note in the chat or just turn your microphone on and ask a question. Well, Dave?
Well, Phil, I know Tara in particular has. Oh, gotcha. She's in the chat.
I don't see the chat, so you better read it to me.
Yeah, I'll let you know. If she doesn't drop anything in, I will say that I know that they piloted a little bit of Giants last year, and so there may already be some familiarity with some of those PowerPoints in particular. I wonder if you might take a second to go over the clickable maps, and I'll feel free to jump in a little bit too. But
Yeah. Okay. Did that pop up on the screen?
it absolutely did.
Joe, the U.S. geography history segment of the clickable maps has got one about the geohistogram that you can put up different parts of it separately. It's got a basic geography of the United States. It's got the colonies map, the, the three different ones, the British, French, and Spanish ones that I've already showed you a couple frames from it. It's got the U.S. in the late 1700s, and then it's got a modern where do we grow crops. So the U.S. in late 1700s basically is the clickable map, the handout map that we've used as the base for the colonies game and for about four of the activities that I showed you. It lets you turn on the borders of the early colonies. And if students forget their names, you can flick the initials on and they can find where Pennsylvania and Virginia and North Carolina, like that. Or if you don't want that much clutter, then just click them back off. You could add the hills, and then you can see that New England basically was a pretty hilly place, except for the Connecticut River Valley and the Hudson River Valley. And you can put the rivers on in order to find out where those valleys are. Um, for somebody in Michigan, it probably helps to put the Great Lakes on and you can see where these things are connected to. But you have to remember that the colonies didn't know anything about those lakes. I mean, they knew there were lakes out there. They just didn't know how far, where they were exactly from where they are. Um, it does tell you a little bit about fishing areas. And remember when we were talking about ocean currents, one of the problems with a warm ocean current, which is what we have on the eastern United States, is that warm water doesn't hold very much oxygen, and fish that don't have very much oxygen tend to float around on the surface and gasp for breath and die. Um, and you just really don't get very much fishing until you get way up here to New England. That means that New England would have an export commodity from fishing. It also means that they would have a reason to keep a lot of boats around. And so when New England became a shipbuilding center, and the South really didn't have much reason to do that kind of thing on either side. So very often when a Southern colony got dropped there, if they lost their ship for whatever reason, they were stuck. You know, they couldn't go anyplace. So it's probably useful to talk a little bit about fishing areas. Tidal range turns out to be another very important variable between the different colonies that people don't think about very often. That with a 12-foot tide up here in Maine and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, 11 feet, you had the capability of making a tidal mill right along the coast, which would let you saw lumber, mill grain, and do other things that you would want to use a mill for. So it started an industrial product that could not be done in parts of the middle colonies. And then finally, when you get down to Georgia, where you get a 9-foot one, you know, Savannah could start out by actually, you know, producing some milled products and so on. You know, it's kind of, you can turn on or off any one of these buttons. You know, I mentioned indigo and rice a little bit earlier, and they're kind of crowded along the coast. I better turn the tide range off so we can actually see them. And wheat production tended to be just on the lowland areas. The reason that people weren't growing wheat in northern Pennsylvania is that it's pretty hilly up there. You know, that's the anthracite company where Joe Biden grew up. and you really can't produce much in the way of an agricultural product there. It helps explain why Lancaster County and the Pennsylvania Dutch and all of that was such an important part of the economy of the early colonies. You've always got a button that you can clear everything off if you want, and then just put back up your state borders like this. Population, we've got a map that shows total population, and then you add on top of it what fraction of the population was enslaved, or you turn the total population off. That's where the slaves were in the late 1700s. And there were slaves in New York and in New Jersey at that time. But the big concentration was here in the tobacco producing area, one of the major export crops from this region. There's also where were the major battles of the Civil War, and where were the different cities that wanted to be the capital after sorry, not the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. So what can I say? We're at the end of 45 minutes here. We're going to start mixing up some sentences. You had any other comments for this, Dave?
Not directly. I just wanted to point out too that Tara, these have elevated or have evolved over time. The clear map button was another one of those things that came from a suggestion. They're like, it takes too long to clear all the buttons, and there is no way for your kids to break this. I know my programming isn't like Microsoft level. I won't be hired there after I retire, but the kids cannot break these in any way, shape, or form. All they have to do is refresh their page if something does go wonky and weird. I wonder, Phil, is there anything on the US geohistogram that might be a quick button show for the kids, or do you think that is too over the head of a fifth grader?
I, I think a fifth grader would use it because I've seen fifth graders use it. One of the things about the way David set this up is that when you put up a clickable map like this, you've still got access to the button that would let you turn on the maps like this. And the US geohistogram has the basic framework is put on here. You can put on these basic regions. This is New England, the Middle, the South, Great Plains, and the Western Desert. There is a region map that you could put down in the corner that shows exactly with the colors where those regions are. We could put the first settlements in each region. And if you want, you could put the name of the first settlement that was in each one of those places. Detroit being one of the first settlements in the middle area here, Jamestown and Plymouth, Santa Fe. And San X is like all of the missions that were built in California, about the first 10 years of Spanish movement up the coast there. It does have arrows for major immigrations. Oh, and I could leave the arrow on and put the names of what they were. We very often will do this where we separate the name from the phenomenon, which gives you the flexibility of using this as a quiz a little bit later on. And you can put this thing up and you can say, these three were about at the same time, but one of them was in New England, one of them was in the middle, and one of them was in the West. What were their names? They make a quiz about that. You're reinforcing the fact that they all happened at roughly the same time, and that the Great Lakes were a little bit later to actually build a permanent settlement, although there were people harvesting furs out of there much earlier. The key to using the geohistogram, though, is not necessarily to use only our layers. You could have the students just write on things like, what were some of the explorers? Where was Henry Hudson? And where was LaSalle? And where was, DeSoto? Some of these other things. We do have a big section about the early presidents. That's probably more important for people in eighth grade as to where that happened. It said what the president parties were. It has something about native names as to what were the indigenous people groups in each of these. The Haudenosaunee up in New England, and the Lakota, and so on. It does not mention the Ojibwe there because we've deliberately left that off so the third graders could write it on as to where they were relative to the other peoples that lived on this continent. Now, what the geohistogram is a kind of a timeline that also adds some geography to it. And it makes the time go from the ancient past at the bottom to the present up at the top, because that is exactly the way the timeline runs in your brain. And if the timeline that you've got on the wall in your classroom goes from left to right, I would like to point out to you that it discriminates against about a third of your students whose mental timeline is so firmly locked in a bottom is old, top is new, that they have trouble reading a horizontal timeline. So we're trying to give you an alternative timeline that you could see what happened. So I've named a bunch of key events in here. The Civil War happened here, and what it did was it shrunk the importance of the South a whole lot, and it made New England a whole lot more important. It also added here, the Dust Bowl kind of did the same thing for the Great Plains. So the presentation adds a whole lot of other things. You know, they put Al Capone on here, you know, and when did the Eli Whitney invent the cotton gin, and where did that happen, and when? In other words, this is a graphic organizer. It's not a teaching device, it's an organizing device. I don't know. Is that what you wanted in the way of kind of quick background on this?
No, I've just in middle school in particular seen a lot of kids really connect history a lot better through the use of this. And it's not a hour-long lesson. It's a quick bring it up and kind of visualize where this is in time, but also in space and place. So it's a really nice visual tool. The world one in particular is super robust. US, I know that Phil has been developing this with National Geographic and a bunch of other organizations, and it's not quite as robust. I would love to see it up to where the world geohistogram is. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for some fifth grade specific items or pieces that we might put onto the US geohistogram, we're always fair game for we're always
Yeah.
game for taking a look.
Let me
I
let me
actually added.
reinforce that point.
Oh,
I'm going to go back real quick and put up the world geohistogram.
which is not one you'll use in fifth grade, more than likely.
Yeah,
But aside
not
from
one
maybe
that you're
one
going to
button,
use in fifth grade, but
there might be
it gives
one
you an
button, Phil.
idea of
Turn
what
on the
all of
United
this looks
States.
like. And you put in all these empires here, and then you put all the names of them on, and so on. Um, you notice how much bigger the button stack is for there. If we go back to look at this one that we've got for the US geohistogram, there's a whole lot of room on the right-hand side there to add buttons, to add more information here. And Dave, of course, is just chomping at the bit to change anything that he's put up on the web like this.
Well,
Maybe
again,
I should leave it there.
I think the most visual piece that a fifth grade teacher might show of the world is if you go back to it really quickly, Phil, turn on the United States layer. Leave the other ones on, but turn on the United States layer.
Okay. So I'm looking for where that is hiding here.
Can you
Second
hear me?
column. Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay. I figured it out. Sorry. It was like all the power went out.
Oh no.
That's why you lost me for a minute. Then I signed on my phone. It was, yeah. Anyways, like it might be help. I could use that one for when I did have to do some back teaching about like Silk Road and things like that. So they like that would be for them to understand kind of what was going on, like China and
Yeah.
the different empires. you know.
So I'm going to put a little flag up there right now for the American Revolution, which happened there, way in the West and way late. And then there's all this world history that happened earlier, the spread of iron and Islam spread around the world and where different religions started and what were some turning points in history. Um, where's agriculture? And what was
It is such an eye opener, in particular for sixth and seventh grade students, to put all those historical empires up and then put America up, and then to turn the rest of those layers off. Because if the world geohistogram represents all of time and all of human history, the U.S. has not been around for that long, and that's always a really eye opening thing for kids. That's why I asked them to turn that button on. That's
yeah. So I could put the American Revolution on there
yeah.
and the timeline and the labels and the fact that Americas are in the West and East Asia and Oceania is off on the east, Australia. So, like I say, there's a lot of room for more topics here. We are open to suggestions.
Is there like a thing that shows like when the French and like the Spanish is that under like regions, or is that not on there yet? Like the different, or even like the empires, like I know that Giants doesn't go into it too much, but like even like the Inca and like the, like some of the
We hit those in seventh grade with the standards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just looking to see, like, because you said if there's anything else, I'm like, those are the only things I would really see.
Yeah,
So.
no, this kind of indicates the general importance of the different regions here, where the color down here. Basically, the orange is just California, Oregon, and Washington. And that started out, and then it kind of grew a little bit fast around 1850 when the gold rush happened. But a little bit fast was still a whole lot smaller and less important than the eastern part of the country. And it's only after about 1950, that after the Dust Bowl had its done and people moved out from the Great Plains to California, that their population increased and their wealth increased. And it had become one of the powerhouses economically and demographically in the country today. Now, the size of the blob is basically how important that region was at that particular time in history. And the South was pretty important. We see that when we look at the presidents, because those are the first 12 presidents. And they basically just shuttled back and forth. You get one from the South, and then you get one from the North, and then you get another one from the South, and so on, bounce back and forth. A little bit later on, the South basically disappeared from the presidential stakes because they just didn't have the votes down there. They didn't have the population, after the Civil War. You got this little period where the presidents were just kind of bouncing back and forth between Ohio and New York.
Yeah, that's great. That's definitely like a good way to show it.
Yeah. And we could add information about the president's party. Take the other buttons off. Well, I'm trying to turn these.
Well, I think she gets the point. We don't have a lot for fifth grade on here, although there are obviously some questions that might come up from students that she might be able to pull it up and showcase later. But I love the geohistogram, which is why anytime I have a chance to ask Phil to do a quick elevator speech for it, I do, because it's one of the coolest tools that are out there. So
yeah, I think it was really neat looking.
Even start out with just something as simple as that, that you're telling people that just about 1600 we had 3 very different colonies at Jamestown, Plymouth, and Santa Fe.
And that's, Tara, where you get the regional piece that you were like, where are the Spanish? Where are the, so at the very least, Santa Fe, they were out there around 1600. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Phil.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you saw my chat, but I did put in there that my kids, like, I did do the where to put the colony activity, and they got really into it. They liked it a lot. You know, they were kind of arguing about like where it would be the most safe, where, you know, why they wouldn't want to be next to the enemies, why they would want to be, you know, it was cute. It definitely was engaging. So,
I could see putting in explorers and Revolutionary War battles would be a possibility. It might
mm-hmm,
also, you could put products onto here. You know, when did we start, we meaning people in North America, start selling furs to Europe?
mm-hmm, yeah,
And where did they come from? And then how about pine trees? Because that was a big product for a little while. Because Britain didn't have much in the way of forests, but they wanted to build ships. And so they were basically getting the white pine trees from New England, and the yellow pine trees they were using to get turpentine and tar so that they could make the ships waterproof. And those were important early products,
yeah.
reasons for developing some of the ports, uh, like Savannah and Charleston and Wilmington. So,
So, Phil, I'm going to take us into our conversation on the assessments, and then we'll do final Q&A, and then we'll kind of wrap up for the night. Does that sound good?
okay, so I'm there.
And I'm on desktop one. So, um, Tara, you already have access to these. I have worked with Jefferson Schools on a couple of different occasions here. So this is primarily for the benefit of the folks who have not yet been through a rollout of any sort, but I'm also going to address a couple of things that surfaced at the Connect we did on Halloween. I got to work with Tara School District on Halloween. I didn't wear a costume. I should have probably, it would have been fun, but so we have assessments available, and during the school year that we built, during the school year that we did our second round revisions of fifth grade Giants, which would have been about 2 school years ago, I think. The big focus in terms of updating wasn't to scrap everything and do everything new. The big focus was to kind of refine some things, revise some things, add some things based off some feedback. And then the big one was assessments. So that's work that like fourth grade still has to do because they rolled out their completely fresh, updated fourth grade units last year. So we rolled these out. We had a great cadre of about 20, 30 teachers that attended hit or miss throughout the course of things. We gave them all access to the assessments, and we were like, great, we want feedback. And during that year, we didn't get any feedback. So the assessments as they are right now stand as they are. Since then, we have received some feedback, and I'll go into that in just a minute. So right now, everything is set up as kind of a Google Doc in terms of it is a PowerPoint presentation. Where we focused on these, we didn't focus as much on the minutia, or we tried not to focus as much on the minutia. Um, because that's the old school history assessment that we've always seen. We tried to think a little bit bigger. We tried to tax kids' brains to think about the bigger, broader picture in a lot of cases. And in some cases, we succeeded, and in some cases, we did not. So, how this is structured for your students, all of these are hidden as the background, so they can't actually change the question, but they can drag where they, I got to remember to drag this back because this is the one that teachers will make a copy of to go, they can drag they can drag the X for a multiple choice question. They can drag those to the appropriate spots so that, you can go through and you can grade each one individually that way. We have essay questions where, it's click here to type your response. So kids will take a look at the question and then they will, ideally type their response in here. We've got markers that can be dragged to the appropriate colonial regions. We have again, we have a variety of multiple choice, multiple selection, technology enhanced type items that appear on the step. The step is not a great assessment. It is really doing things at a lower level. But they have updated over the years to include more than just multiple choice style questions. So we created these based off of some other work that had already been done, and we kind of updated them in terms of what were some of the bigger themes of each unit that we wanted to assess. And so these are out here and available for you. We had a request for answer keys one year, so now we've got the answer keys to go along with them. But you are not going to find the assessments anywhere on the Giants website. And the reason for that is not as much at the elementary level, but seventh and eighth graders know them some Google. And they will, they will go Giants unit assessments. And if there's a direct link that's easy to get to, they will be able to find those. So we kind of keep it under lock and key. So they're kind of a secret, so to speak, unless you are put into contact with me, or unless you've attended one of these rollouts or you've watched one of these videos. So for everyone who's not Tara, if you need access to the fifth grade assessments in their current form, you send me an email, and if it's questionable, like I've gotten like a prancing pony 42 at yahoo.com. I'm like, can you tell me where you work so I can look you up real quick? And if that happens, I will send it to the school address or the school email address. But um, basically, if you shoot me an email, I will give you access to the Google folder that has everything that is currently available and anything that might be updated as we go through. Now, I mentioned before, we've got a superstar from Jefferson Schools here tonight, and I've been working with them, and Stan Masters worked with them a little bit on some piloting, question and answers, that sort of thing. And a request that surfaced at our October meeting that I've started to investigate is, hey, you know what? It's kind of clunky to grade from a PowerPoint presentation. I totally agree. I followed the format that sixth grade did when they went through. They went through during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, a lot of people adopted online curriculum in case they went up and down again, which many schools did. But there was nothing that actually fit Michigan's sixth grade standards. So Giants got really big during there. We put it into Canvas for teachers, but there was no access for the assessment database with that packaging. So those teachers, because the teachers, Andrea and Sharon from Grand Haven, that really spearheaded the sixth grade units, were incredible. They were masters of their craft, and they had had some luck with English language arts class doing some tests through Google Presentate or through Google's version of PowerPoint, basically. And those sixth grade teachers really kind of liked that format of that year. So I sort of designed these with that in mind. Again, a perk of doing it through this route is you have the ability to do item types that might appear on the M-Step beyond just a multiple choice style test. But what surfaced when I was at Jefferson, I'm guessing they're really much a Google school. They requested, can we do it in the Google Forms format? And part of that is ease and comfort of that as a testing platform. The other part of it is obviously everything but the essay questions get graded for you, which is a huge time saver, especially for elementary teachers, because you wear all the hats. You got to teach the math class and grade all that. You got to teach the English class. You teach all that and grade all that. You got to do all the science. You got to do all the social studies. So after that, I kind of thought about it for a little bit, and I went in and I started to play with the quiz format in Google Forms. And I'm not sure I can adapt all of these questions to that format, primarily because anything so I can do a multiple selection. I can do a select all that apply, like this one. I can do a multiple choice question very easily. What I can't do are some of these drag and drop style questions, which, if we're assessing the content standards, I don't love all the super low level mapping ones in particular. Identify where these places are on a map. But there's not a really clear way to do some of these drag and drop style questions that way. It's not to say all of our drag and drop questions are map based, but I've got to put a little more time into thinking out how I might change and adapt some of those questions. There was also a fair point, when you, I live in a very old farmhouse, and when you add on to that farmhouse over time, you are working over top of things that have already existed that you sort of just let go as you add new things. Case in point, I'm going to be flooring over Christmas break, my daughter's bedroom. And I've already noticed a couple of areas that, gosh, it would be great if I had time to repair that. I don't have time to repair that part of it right now. She's not going to fall through the ceiling as she walks across the new floor because she hasn't fallen across the ceiling yet. But again, in stacking some of those things on, one of the last things we added were the open book reading guides. And in the chat, Tara surfaced, it would be great if there were more connections to some of those questions as well, because we're reading, we're doing all these in-class activities, and we want more questions that bring all of that together instead of just focusing on some of the bigger picture pieces that come with the rest of the lesson. So my answer is I'm definitely not saying no. I love the challenge. I have to go in and really figure out how I can adapt some of these questions. And maybe I don't adapt some of these questions. Maybe it's what Tara requested, and I add questions that link back more to some of those reading guide pieces. I have to give it some thought though, because we really built these tests to run the range of depth of knowledge levels. We don't get to a 4 because 4 is extended learning. 4 would be asking that big question that I started tonight off with about what the whole course is about, and asking them to write about it at the end of the year. That represents that long-term, engaged, deep thinking, huge connection piece that a depth of knowledge 4 would go. But these assessments run the gamut of straight up recall through some of that more evidentiary justification piece. And I don't want to lose that range. So I have to think about it. Changes will come. I'm definitely going to honor that request, but they're not going to be ready tomorrow. It's probably going to be something that might launch next year. So keep access to that Google folder. And if you're watching this next year, hopefully all those things are there. And you'll have the option of choosing the PowerPoint version or what I'm able to put together with the Google Forms version. But as it stands right now, I can convert about a third, depending on the test, a third or 2/3 of the test to Google Forms right now really easily. And I have to think about the best way to make sure we're assessing all the content expectations through that lens. So I'm going to honor the request. I just don't know how yet. That is a February, Dave, problem, because that is when my calendar clears enough for me to really put in the time and effort to start updating some of those questions. So, Tara, does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. I personally just one of the reasons that I do like I know it has like constraints. I do like the quick like snapshot you get of like the data. You can kind of see like right away, like everybody missed number 3, so I need to reteach number 3. It's like you can quickly see that, which a lot of like, the online testing platforms for some of the ELA or math do this like kind of for the tests for like those. So this is like, I guess would be my like, I would like it in social studies for the same reason, where you can just kind of like quickly see like who missed what question. You can go back through and like go over it with the kids. Like I've even had some, like when I have like done quizzes and tests on this kind of format and even another format at a different school that I was at previously, but I've even brought up like the bar graphs for them and put it on the screen. And I always felt like that helped them a little bit, like understand, like, look, we have like 12 people that understood. And then we've got like this many people who didn't understand. Like, what didn't you understand? Then you kind of like work through the data together as a team. And then like I feel like then they even understand more why a grade matters. It's good, you know what I mean? It's like you're kind of going through it with them and saying like, hey, like this tells me like I need to reteach. You guys didn't quite understand like how the Native American environment like influenced, them creating their habitats or whatever. So that's kind of what I like about it, is just sort of, it just gives you those like quick data snapshots, puts it right into that nice little graphene format for you. And but yeah, I completely understand. Like I know with STEP even, there's a lot of weird test formats that like make it, you can't quite do, not everything is not multiple choice. So like I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And again, I'm gonna figure out how to honor that request. As Phil knows, I couldn't program a single clickable map very well on my first attempt, but now 10 years later, here I am. So, if I start with 5th grade for that particular reason, I know that you guys, I did the same thing in 7th grade. I taught out of Moodle. And as soon as I saw the reports, this was back in 2009, 2010 at the time when I was doing it, but as soon as I saw those reports that you could get, I used them with my seventh and eighth graders all the time. I was like, look, guys, you guys really, really blew this one out of the water. You guys did a great job on this. I'm a little concerned over here, so let's talk about what happened there. And it's a great opportunity to surface those misconceptions and misunderstandings with students. So I totally hear you and totally get you because you do not get that from a Google Slides presentation and having kids take it that way. So it's a little more legwork on your end that we've already identified you don't have time for. You're teaching all the content areas and you got to do all the grading for all the content areas. So even if you've compartmentalized, you're doing at least two of them, which is still a lot. So I'm going to figure this one out for you. So.
Thank you. No rush or anything, but yeah, thanks.
All right, so we are at the portion of the evening for general Q&A, and I know that there weren't a ton of questions back when I tuned into Jefferson Schools back in October. Has anything new surfaced for you now, Tara, that might be beneficial for people watching this recap later to know, hear, understand, anything like that? Any major questions for either one of us?
Nothing so far. I mean, this is my first time teaching it. So, I'm learning kind of the pacing and the order that it's going in. I'm trial and error. I'm kind of just, working through it. I really do like the guided reading notes. That those are very helpful. I feel like because when we just do group reads, I feel like the kids were kind of just glossing over things, not really paying attention. But I feel like I've done them the last couple chapters that we read, and I really noticed a big difference. Like they actually stop, they look for the answer, and then we've been reviewing them as a class. And then it's also something else I can grade as well, like like a nice grade to give them because it's like effort and accuracy as like an along the way grade, and as opposed to just like an end of unit assessment. But those have been very helpful to me just because I feel like it does kind of break down the text for them, the my book or whatever. And I do see them thinking more about the answers than if we're just, doing like a read aloud or something like that. So that's been something that I've liked that I found in this last couple chapters. I'm moving a little slow. I think I'm a little bit behind schedule right now, but so we'll see like how the, new year goes. But other than that, just that's more my feedback I really like the open book guides. And then I'm looking at the colonies game. It does seem like, I would like to do something like this because I feel like this is the kind of stuff kids remember. It's kind of like all of us our age, or we played Oregon Trail. We still remember, I still remember things from Oregon Trail. So I'd like to do it. It's a little bit overwhelming looking at it, I'm not going to lie. But I really do want to try and hit it after Christmas break with them, which again, I'm a little bit behind, but yeah, so I might be asking questions once I try to pilot it. So we'll see.
3 to 5 years to get good with any curriculum, so you're not behind your learning. You're exactly where you need to be.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I think Phil and I can call it for the evening. We really appreciate your time and attendance, whether you were Tara in here with us or viewing this again, months or years from now. It's going to kind of conclude the Giants video series when all of these are done because they'll be up online and people can get this 3,000-foot view or they can get into the weeds with the individual unit rollouts. But we appreciate you viewing this, and we will see you back here in just a few weeks after the new year to kick off the launch of sixth grade one final time here. So thank you very much, and we will talk to you soon.